Welcome, everybody, to our office hours. It's September 5th, 2023. And our special guest this evening is Ben Mirin. He is a PhD candidate at the very famous Cornell University Laboratory of Ornithology. And he has a fascinating background as a musician and as someone who's studying the sounds of animals and birds in particular. He will tell us a lot more about that, and we'll see how it all comes together around our interests in music making and technology, and how we interact with our environment through music and so on. So, Ben, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, June. And it's really nice to reconnect with you and to be in this shared space where we discuss how music can awaken our attention to different parts of the world and to how we coexist with other kinds of musicians. So I'm really flattered that you invited me to be part of this. As you mentioned, I'm currently in I'm actually in my last year of my PhD, got a year to go here at Cornell. And I just got back from a Fulbright Hays Fellowship to Indonesia, where I was living in the city of Yogyakarta for a year. So if you look at a map of Indonesia, it's actually one behind me, but it's all blurred out. And you zoom in on Java, I'm right in the center of that island, in this old city that used to be one of the two central kingdoms of Java before the colonial era. And it's amazing to be able to do things like what I get to do now as a researcher, but my path to getting there is different than most. Before I started my PhD, I carved my own path as an explorer with places like the National Geographic Society. And I was also a wildlife DJ, which is a phrase I coined to describe what I do, which combines music and nature and science and storytelling in ways that I still find so interesting, because it's a way for me to keep learning about my craft and its relevance to other people and fields and places and non-human beings. Wildlife DJ essentially combines my lifelong passions for music and nature, and it's allowed me to make some unique contributions to the fields of science and conservation. And I think it's best to take you through my process, and starting first with my source of inspiration. This is a video by my colleagues Tim Lehman and Ed Scholes of the Birds of Paradise project. The project is based at Cornell and National Geographic. And this particular video showcases a male Goldie's bird of paradise, a high-dwelling canopy species that makes a wonderful array of vocal and visual displays during its courtship. But sometimes it's best to let the bird speak for himself. As you can see, males of this species perform their courtship displays in pairs, and their vocalizations and movements are coordinated and sometimes synchronized. In bioacoustics, we analyze signals like this using spectrographic analysis, which graphically represents acoustic signals like this one on a plot of frequency over time. This allows us to identify behavioral traits and details that might escape our attention. We can recognize important signals of ecosystem health. Detecting acoustic signals like these in a forest can provide strong arguments for the protection of a wild place. It indicates the presence of rare and endangered species, which we can use in arguments for new policy to protect wild places. It measures overall species abundance and richness, which can change as ecosystems come under threat from forces like climate change, biodiversity loss, and human encroachment. It can even be used to detect human pressure, like poaching and deforestation, by capturing the sounds of chainsaws, gunshots, human voices, and the disappearance of species that might otherwise indicate the health of forest, especially birds and insects and amphibians. Sound gives us a different way to pay attention, and reaches new kinds of people. Music and bioacoustics are a natural combination in that way, especially when you make music from nature itself. The cleaner the recording, the more we can learn about it, and the better it sounds. This is a piece I put together from the sounds of Kalimantan, and it's on tour right now with the National Arts Center of Canada as part of the Great Orchestra Field Trip, which is a campaign we're doing where we bring music into classrooms to help students connect with nature. We're focusing on middle school students, but they've kindly given me a copy of this to share for presentation purposes.
When you live in the rainforests of Borneo, sometimes it can be hard to see your friends through the trees, so you have to make contact another way. You could fly up to the treetops and sing like a bird. That's a golden-whiskered barbet. Of course, this strategy is not unique to birds. Lots of primates use sound to survive, like this gibbon. And don't forget the orangutan. If we really listen to nature, we can bring all our voices together as one. Everybody now. That's very much. Now move, move. Come on. Let's go!
Before starting my PhD, I made music like this around the world, leading expeditions and participating in expeditions to document rare sounds in nature and composing music with local artists to inspire conservation. As a universal language, music became an emancipatory tool, reaching outside audiences who are beyond the traditional scope of science communication and highlighting new voices and discussions about our collective future. I expanded this idea by making a computer game with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology called Beastbox. Lets anyone make music from my collection of animal sounds, our collection, we should say. The game shares my idea with the world so that anyone can become a wildlife DJ and appreciate nature through sound and music. My hope is that these creative experiences encourage young people to apply their passions and talents to conservation at a time when we desperately need new ideas and creativity in how we protect and live alongside the natural world. The sense of urgency comes from my own experiences in unique ecosystems around the world. One particular expedition to Honduras set these goals in stark relief. Working with herpetologist Jonathan Colby, filmmaker Katie Garrett, and local naturalists Santiago Argueta and Miguel and Ana Mejia, in 2018, this team set out to record the unheard voice of the exquisite spike-thumbed frog, Plectrohyla exquisita. This frog is endemic to the cloud forests of Casuco National Park in northwestern Honduras. And because it lives nowhere else, that makes it extremely vulnerable to threats from climate change, deforestation, and human-borne pathogens. Currently, it is critically endangered. Sound is an essential tool for protecting endangered frogs. Conservationists play back recordings of frog calls in captive breeding programs to inspire competition and get them to reproduce. But without any recordings of Plectrohyla exquisita, we had no soundtrack to set the mood. When we arrived in Casuco in May 2018, the frogs were everywhere. To our great surprise, we found them sitting in pools of water in the afternoon. Why would a nocturnal tree frog come down to the river in broad daylight? Well, to figure that out, we hiked that evening down the Casuco River and placed a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone, in one of the pools where we had seen the frogs. Almost instantly, we heard this sound. It was a consistent mechanical click, repeated 5 or 6 times, every 5 to 10 seconds. But we didn't know what it was. Then our guide, Miguelito, grabbed my shoulder and pointed. Mira, la rana está aquí. The frog is here. I turned and I saw this frog swimming through the water, and I heard that click again. The frog wrapped its hands around the leg of the tripod and started to climb. And as it left the water, the sound stopped. John and I were stunned. We may have just heard the voice of Plectrohyla exquisita for the first time, and it was coming from underwater. As good scientists, we have to be skeptical, so we're still conducting experiments to verify the identity of this sound. Even so, breakthroughs like this are exciting. Our recording is new to science and captures new details about the life and behavior of a critically endangered species. In addition, if this voice belongs to Plectrohyla exquisita, it can be used to rebuild the frog's population and bring it back to the brink of extinction. Since making this discovery, I've realized I want science to be at the core of my work. It has inspired me to produce independent films, write and publish books with Indigenous communities, and even create my own web series, Wild Beats, on National Geographic Kids, which actually went on television a few years ago. And that's what has brought me here to Cornell to do my PhD research. It's what sent me to Indonesia. And I'd be very happy to share a little bit more about the details of that. The publications are forthcoming. But June, I'd love to know if you have any questions about what we've talked about so far. And if you'd like to just kind of dive into the next step and what I've just done, we can talk about that as well. So thanks.
I was curious about the beast box.
Yeah, I bet.
Which is a really engaging way to get kids to start recognizing different sounds and different habitats and so on. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about, describe for our audience like how that works, or even?
Yeah. So, folks, if you want to play Beast Box, all you have to do is go to benmirin.com. And then click on the top right here on Beast Box.
Wow. Beast Box.
All of the sounds you're about to hear are either from my voice were the voices of wildlife that my colleagues and I recorded firsthand in the field. These are the directions. It's pretty self-explanatory. I can just walk you through it. Essentially, you can change your beat up here. There's a loop in the center of the top part of the screen to kind of help you keep track of where you are. So it changes the energy. Now, if we go down here, you can see there are all these animals in this sound bank down here. You can scroll back and forth, and you can meet up to 30 different species and listen to their sampled voices first and foremost. And the idea of the game is to see who lives with whom. And if you can guess who lives in the same ecosystem and figure that out, you will unlock beast mode and open up these ecosystem tracks at the top right of the screen. So let's throw some animals in there, just make something up. June, do you want to tell me which one I should pick first?
Well, let's start with who's that third from the left?
1, 2, 3. This guy?
That guy. Oh, like a new wildebeest, is that what that is?
A wildebeest, yes.
Right.
So he's loading. Of course they dance. So since it's just one, we should probably add some more to the mix.
Yeah. So he lives in Africa on the Serengeti or something. Who else lives there? Let's see. I just
I'll give you a hint. This guy lives there. Shall we add him?
Sure, okay.
Okay. This is the gray-crowned crane.
Yes.
All right. So the remainder of our sounds from the African continent.
Yeah.
Well, there are a couple here and there are a couple back towards the front. But, you know, part of this is just experimentation. You don't have to get it right. So what would you like to add next?
Oh, how about that guy with the big round bug eyes?
The bug eyes.
Right, just right at the triangle.
Right in the middle?
Yep.
Okay.
Or something? What is that?
So this is an Indri lemur. Can I add one?
Yeah, add one.
All right.
An ibis.
How did an ibis? I think it needs to be bassy in there. Maybe if we go back. So we have a bass here in the elephant, a bass in a blue whale, a bass in a bobcat. Got a few options.
Let's go with the elephant. You can tell what he was because there's like.
Yeah, right. He just barely fits in there.
I was like, oh.
So I'll give you a hint. I like this beat. So let's take away the entry. The tropical boo-boo shrike.
Beast mode.
So now we've unlocked beast mode.
Okay.
Come on, let's dance.
And you can hear the full mastered track.
Sounds of the wildest
And
waters.
if you have a
of
touch
Africa.
screen, you can tap the animals and make them dance.
Yeah, we become the water.
So you can go back to the main screen.
Yeah.
This is where you can get a free download of 20 sounds. But let's take a look down below. So this is probably my favorite part of the game,
Okay.
because it takes me back to my roots and the roots of everything we just heard. You can scroll through, learn about this vociferous mammal here, and then keep going, and you can see the original, the answers to the game are down here if you really want to check. But you can meet each of the animals, learn about their natural history, and we started with that wildebeest. So let's listen to the original track that we recorded in the field, which I later sampled. So with or without me, there is a symphony singing constantly around the entire world. And our job is to tune in. And I just hope that this game encourages people from a bigger range of backgrounds and skills to listen to nature the way that I do. And that it reminds everyone that we all coexist with these species. And especially as we hover on the brink of some irreversible environmental changes and losses, we need an infusion of creativity, of diversity, of fresh ideas. We cannot maintain the status quo. There are lessons we can learn from where we've been so far. Don't get me wrong, but we still need new ideas, fresh faces. And I just want this game to say, hey, if you're a musician, if you're technologically inclined, you are welcome here. Your gifts are welcome here, and we need them. We need you. So that's my driving passion with all of this, is to simply make nature more inclusive and conservation more universal.
Well, and that's great. And that the music forges a deeper, direct emotional connection to the idea. You can read all you want and in academic journals and so on.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So like in any musical ensemble, you have like bass instruments, you have like alto, you have instruments that occupy different frequency ranges, right? And timbres and so on.
Right.
So that obviously, so you can hear if they all had the same thing, they would all be kind of mush. It would be hard to distinguish the different parts. Do you think that there's the same thing in nature, where there's like an ecosystem where animals occupy different ranges so they can hear their own species against others? Is there kind of a...
Yes. So this is the backbone of a lot of my approach to composition. There's something called the acoustic niche hypothesis that stipulates that animals evolved to occupy discrete bandwidths within that frequency spectrum. And you remember the spectrographic readout that I showed as part of my presentation, that graph? It's like pieces of a puzzle that fit together. And when my one rule as a composer sampling from these signals is that I don't auto-tune. I want it to be in the key of orangutan. So I will listen to field recordings for hours on end, writing down moments in time that are interesting to me as a musician, as well as a scientist. Because if they're interesting as a scientist, that means that there's a story behind it too, that fuels the creativity. And when I then weave them together, my instruments are pre-mixed by evolution and by sexual selection to harmonize naturally in a fixed ecosystem. Now, of course, as with any scientific discipline, hypotheses, no matter how many times you substantiate them, always have exceptions. So when you go to some ecosystems, there is a convergence of animals that sing in the same frequency bandwidth, and it may be for a variety of reasons. They may not rely as heavily on sound to make contact and to stake out territory. There may be other sound sources in the environment that obfuscate certain parts of that bandwidth and make it kind of useless to communicate at perhaps low frequencies, especially near anthropogenic noise like cities or highways that are built through the marshland. There are a lot of studies with grassland birds and with urban birds that show that they actually shift their voices higher to overcome the competition from our noise pollution. And so those stories of coexistence are woven in here as well. But the niche hypothesis is something that really inspired me and got me thinking about the story that came before, the music that came before, and how it's already perfect. And what changes it is how we coexist or fail to coexist with that symphony of the never sleeps.
Fascinating. I'm also thinking of some birds in particular are amazing mimics, and you wonder,
yes,
it's a whole other level of why, for purposes of deception or trickery.
Well, and if I can just go down a side street for one quick second again. I mean, I remember doing some research on lyrebirds, which are native to Southern Australia, and probably for their money, I can't think of a better mimic in nature. And there are a lot of them. So that really says something. Starlings come close. They're pretty good, but I just never had my jaw drop the way it did when I first heard a lyrebird imitating sounds. And there are studies, both biological and cultural, that actually look at the songs of lyrebirds over time. People used to keep them as pets 100 or so years ago, and they would play the flute to them until the bird learned to sing the melodies of a human song. They then released those birds, and now several generations later, we can still hear those songs being passed down between generations of birds. So we're having this conversation through music that then shapes the music that comes to us. And of course, it's not exactly the same. We get to hear the cultural influences of how a lyrebird will teach its offspring and how the offspring will learn that song. So it's more interesting than a note for note repeat would be, because you get to learn about the influence the bird has in the melody you thought you knew. So there's just, it's endless. This is a joyous space.
Totally. Great. Just another question more on the technology side. What tools did you use to make Beastbox? Did you write it from scratch, or were there certain like programming platforms that made it easier to do that?
Well, I'm always eager to learn more about this from folks who are greater experts than I. I'm self-taught. And when I started out, if I had it here in my office, I would show you. I had an analog sampler. And so it was, save for the actual scissors, literally cutting pieces of sound and pasting them onto buttons. And when I was working in my broken apartment, the lag time between when you edit the sound, you unplug the card, and you run over to the sampler and plug it in, I would have to turn off the appliances in my apartment. Because God forbid, the tone of the refrigerator would throw off the system I was keeping in my head. And then I would plug it in, see how it was working. It wasn't so great. Okay, I have to unplug it, run back in, and change the start and stop time. And it was like learning how to loop in the 1970s and 80s with like analog tape. Really, on some level, you feel like you're tapping into the purest level of the art. But at the same time, you're learning a lot because you're messing up constantly. So I eventually graduated to Ableton, which is now my software of choice. And I linked up with them, and they actually gave me a push, their launchpad, their compositional tool to accompany my license that I recently purchased. And they were just really excited about what I was working on and wanted to give me tools to take to the next level. And so they did. That was really, really helpful. A lot of the workflow I just described completely went away. And now I just kind of, one machine talks to the other machine instantaneously. And I can get a lot more sophisticated in the ways that I weave together sounds. Because as I mentioned before, I don't use auto-tune. I just kind of excerpt recordings. And being able to have a much larger digital interface to play either lots of tinier pieces of songs or lots of different songs from different animals all at the same time. You get to discover amazing, well, you almost want to call them coincidences, but on the other hand, are they? Animals from the same ecosystem you weave together these moments in one voice with the moments of another, and suddenly a new melodic line emerges. And that's the two happiest moments in my life are when that happens and when I have a parabola and I train the microphone and I lock on to a bird or other animal in the field, and the sound shimmers in my headphones because the signal is so clear. The rest of the world just disappears when that happens. That moment of intimacy and creative inspiration is just irreplaceable to me. So the tech is both on the laptop side with Ableton,
Oh, and on the
and then the parabolic reflector, the different mics I've learned to use over the years, because you also have to choose your mic for your target source. You know, you can't record a whale with a parabola. So it's kind of on both ends. And then I use some software called Isotope RX to occasionally clean up samples. And the only reason I do that, I don't like if I submit things for research purposes, I don't edit the sounds because you want all of that data. And that means that if you want a really clean sound, you must practice the ritual of hunting your source and getting closer and closer and angling the mic just right to get a beautifully clean sound. Because you can't really delete the background later if you're using it for archival purposes.
right.
But
You're just praying a jet doesn't fly overhead at the wrong
yeah,
moment.
exactly. Oh, so many times. It really is quite a lesson again, the human impacts on the sonic world. But I use RX to clean up the background in my samples because I'm trying to, in some ways, preserve and in other ways recreate an ecosystem symphony for my audience, whoever they may be. And you don't want to duplicate the background 20 to 30 times, depending on how many samples you have, because you're just going to, there's going to be this crazy amount of sound in the background. And it won't do justice to what you're trying to celebrate. So I guess there are, every artist has their own kind of chemical makeup or formulas for how to, like, where to make compromise and where to stay pure and what pure even means. So I guess that's kind of how I do it.
That's cool. Well, that brings up a really important point, which is that so much of technology has been driven by art because the art creates a purpose as someone who's trying to achieve a certain effect or understand or do something with the material world or whatever and transform it, and usually, if you're on the cutting edge, you're like pushing the envelope of the tools that are available. You have to invent new tools or adapt your technologies or so on. So I mean, that's what's exciting about a place like the Media Lab, which is where the Hyperscore was born, because it's really the artistic impulse that drives the advancement of technology. And so anyway,
that's a lovely point, and it just reminds me of the artistic demand placed on technology producers, because if the tools don't exist, we will combine whatever we do have and come up with these Frankensteinian assemblages of things until someone sees that enough times. So like, you know what, we should make a thing that does all that. And then they do. So it's always, I love that dialogue.
All right. Also, it's a little plug for the value of the arts. The value is not in that it pushes technology, but it happens to do that at the same time that it's pushing, expression and communication and, So, anyway, I think you had more did you want to jump back into your presentation or is that
that's all I have for now. I can talk in broad strokes though about my dissertation research because it does build on this stuff.
Okay.
I just don't have a lot of the data is forthcoming, and once we publish, then I can more freely shout it from the rooftops.
Sure. Well, we'll have to have you back.
I love that. Yeah. I have a feeling this is one of the first of many conversations on these topics. So by now, you and to anyone watch this, you collectively know that I love birdsong. Like I really love it. And music has been a part of my life and a way for me to reconnect with nature. I started making these beats when I lived in Brooklyn. And don't get me wrong, there's nature in the city. There's always nature if you look hard enough and listen closely. But I had grown up in more rural places for most of my life. And so to me, it wasn't as readily apparent. And so I started making this music as a form of therapy to reconnect with the birds I felt I had lost. And then while I was doing that, I came across this story in 2018 was about birds that were traded and sold and competed for their voices. It turns out that across Southeast Asia, there are millions of people who share my passion, but express it in a very different way. The songbird trade in Indonesia, where I did my film, is a multi-billion-dollar industry, trillions of rupiah. It's known by, it's recognized for its economic contributions to the development of the nation. It provides jobs to millions of people, whether they're catching birds, selling birds in markets, or even training birds to sing in these singing competitions. The competitions are kind of where the birds make their debut, in front of a panel of human judges who walk around with corkboards rating them on their performances. And that's a whole other question of what constitutes the perfect bird song, right? And then while they're watching, scores of people are around the periphery of these arenas, shouting and cheering and saying, hey, hey, my bird's singing. It's like being at the racetrack and watching horses go around. It's a spectacle unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I just spent a year living in that community and working alongside conservationists to meet with bird keepers and traders and even former bird hunters who agreed to take us through the forest and show us their methods, which are hauntingly normal and simple and extremely effective. Hauntingly normal in the sense that when they did it, it wasn't dramatic at all. Just caught birds like it was nothing. This just shows you how normal it is to, for people to catch birds where I was. And so I never thought that my love, my great love, birdsong, could be commoditized. And yet, here's an entire industry predicated on capturing these voices, and then people train them in their homes through playback recordings, through exposure to other bird songs. Sometimes they'll have multiple birds in multiple cages next to each other in their homes. And you'll walk through the house and there can be birds in every room. So all of this is sort of, it's fascinating, but it's also troubling. When you engage with nature the way I do, you can't help but feel a special connection with the voices in the wild because they're not possessions, they're gifts. They come to you in a moment that you're fortunate to witness. But if you have them in a cage 24/7, it's like, streaming. It's like having Netflix. There's no chance of anything. There's also no journey to get to that place where you happen to hear the bird song. And unfortunately, this trade is so massive and the financial stakes are so high, you can win up to 10 years' salary in a single singing competition in Indonesia. That the birds are going extinct in the wild. They are being selected out of existence for their singing abilities. It's this paradoxical inversion of sexual selection, which would favor the most vociferous and showy males, who are now being harvested for that exact reason. So the ones left behind are the meek, the timid, the quiet. And it's called silent forest syndrome. And I've walked through rainforests that, I should say up front, I haven't listened to them for decades on end, so I cannot personally account for the changes, but it's definitely not what you expect it to be. When you go to Southeast Asian rainforests, you expect, an avalanche of sound, and it's just not there. You can hear some birds in the morning around dawn, but it's mostly crickets and the occasional, hawk calling in the distance. So this creates a conservation challenge because at the same time that Indonesian people and people in general around the world do this, deserve an income, deserve hobbies, deserve a chance to express themselves and to cultivate community and even identity through these things, we lose a part of ourselves and a part of what makes our nations, our regions, our species proud, which is our natural heritage, the place where we all came from, and the place that we can still call home if we really listen to it. I think a lot of the research I'm doing is exploring how we can work together rather than having differences demarcate the strategies for bird keepers and for conservationists and scientists like me, is to say, okay, we all love birds. Let's start from there and plant the seeds of conservation in common.
Yep.
And once we move from there, and that's what my dissertation is about, is what the community has revealed about its solutions and strategies for successful coexistence, harmonious coexistence. But my piece is just one small piece of a long running puzzle. That's science, that's conservation. If we're not in the business of doing things year to year, we operate in decades at the minimum. So that's kind of a broad picture.
That's amazing. I had not heard about that extent of that culture and of birds. I mean, I'm familiar with all the caged birds and you see in Southeast Asian markets and so on, and a lot of places where people love bringing that voice of the bird into their home, capturing, lightning in a bottle sort of.
Yes.
But I think I hope that there's hope there. I think what you're doing is really important, because you have to harness the self-interest, I guess, of the people of that culture to preserve it and maintain it and sustain it and not let it go extinct. So they're absolutely vital to being part of the stewardship of that natural resource.
I think it's important to acknowledge my own positionality too as a researcher, and that means multiple things. Most germane to what we were just saying, it's possible to empathize with these bird keepers. You spend enough time with them, you see they love their birds the way we in the West so often love dogs and cats. And if they know what they're doing, they take good care of them. That was part of what I documented, was the techniques. Now, some of the techniques are a little unorthodox and still need some scientific vetting, I think. But the dedication is there. The passion is there. And I remember getting interested in birds when I was 3 years old. My mom gave me a book on penguins. I couldn't read it, but I just knew, like, what is this? Take me to see this. And so we went to the Boston Aquarium. And then we went to Drumlin Farm near my folks' current home in Concord, Massachusetts. We saw birds in cages. That was my gateway. And that's a gateway for a lot of people. It's mesmerizing to be close up and personal to these beings that live in the same world we do and yet are so different from us. But I want to know, and I think that technology and music can be tools in this. How do we take that initial spark moment and lead everyone to experience nature in its current forms, seeing things in the wild, and then negotiating a more sustainable place of coexistence for our species alongside the panoply of others that make up this fabric of life that produced us.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I hope we can help support through the work we're doing with Hyperscore, because I think it starts for us with active listening, like what is in the world around you, and hopefully bird sounds are part of that world, and then to ask kids or anybody really to reflect on what that means for them, what it evokes for them emotionally, intellectually, and then to express that through music, through a tool that you don't need years of conservatory training. You just need a heart and ears, a mind, kind of start making these sounds and then shaping them and creating composition. So, we have started to think, we've been thinking for a long time actually about how do we incorporate other things besides traditional instrumental music, and what does it mean? And I think it's really interesting to talk about the sort of ecology of natural sounds, and that so unlike a violin that can go from a low G to all the way up to several octaves, maybe birds occupy somewhat more limited pitch spectrums, but they each have their place, and so it might be a different way of thinking about instrumentation, so to speak, and how to create, like, say, birdsong sets that people can use to so I hope we began that conversation before and hope we continue it, and our aim is to just broaden the palette of sounds of our world that people can use as part of their creative expression. So
I love that, and I think it's so essential to all of our tools like Hyperscore, because you invite people in, and there's no right answer. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're engaging, that is the key to everything. And where it takes you is your own journey, and we're excited to see where you go.
Totally.